What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Zero Lab. Today we're going to be taking a look at some online tournament results in the current Stellar Crown format. We are most of the way through this format now, although we do have a few other major events in this format, as well as obviously your local league cups and league challenges. And so we kind of want to see the state of the format, how things are going in these bigger online tournaments, and then see what that could mean for LAIC and beyond. Obviously, LAIC is our last event in this format. Sadly, LAIC will not be in the Surging Sparks format, but Sacramento after that will be. So we do have one at least major event in the Stellar Crown format with the Latin America International Championship. So we're going to be taking a look at the online results in the current format and see what those are telling us. So starting out, we have the late night 215. The late nights are really the biggest online tournaments that we have right now. So those are the ones I think that will give us the best information. So we're going to be looking at the top 8 decks from the latest late nights from the end of October here. So for the late night 215, you will notice there is a lot of Gardevoir EX featured here. Our first place was Gardevoir Banette, so that's less of a Gardevoir deck and more of like an item lock Banette deck. Then we do have like a typical Gardevoir EX deck with Drifloons and Screamtail and that sort of thing. We have another Gardevoir Banette in third, Charizard in the top 4, and then our top 8 was rounded out with another Gardevoir Drifloon, Raging Bolt, Regidrago, and Snorlax. So this is really interesting. Lots of Gardevoir, lots of Banette. And then the new sort of Snorlax list with that boxed order rather than playing the Rotom V-Star. I think this is really interesting. There's a couple of top decks missing from this top 8. More specifically, we're not seeing any Lugia in this top 8. We're not seeing any Terapagos in this top 8. So that is very interesting. Also, we obviously saw Lost Zone do pretty well in Louisville just a couple weeks ago. No Lost Zone in here, although I think Lost Zone was more of a meta call for that Louisville event rather than like a top deck in this current format. We'll talk about more of these lists a little bit later on in the video, but we're going to look at the top 8 from the Late Night 216, which happened later in the day on Wednesday after the Late Night 215. And we have some different top 8 decks here. We have Dragapult coming in first, Gardevoir Banette again coming in second, and then top 4 was rounded out by Iron Thorns and Klawf. And then our top 8 was Lugia, another Gardevoir Banette, Pidgeot Control, and Lugia. So we see Lugia doing a little bit better here in this other late night. We still see Gardevoir Banette doing very well as well, and then Dragapult taking the whole thing down, rounded out by a Pidgeot Control deck, Iron Thorns, and Klawf. So what is the state of the meta right now? It looks to be that this Gardevoir Banette deck is taking off. Azul was the player who got second in the late night 216 with the Gardevoir Banette. I know Piper Lapine played Gardevoir Banette to Louisville as well, so I think this is maybe a deck that's picking up a little bit of steam in this format. Lugia also being represented here. I think Lugia is one of those decks that has a very good matchup into actually the majority of this top 8 aside from that Iron Thorns. There are some techs obviously that you can play in Lugia to beat Iron Thorns, like a Fluttermane or a Klefki. But very interestingly, Lugia seemed to have the best spread into this top 8. I think it's got a very good matchup into Gardevoir, Dragapult, and Klawf, as well as that Pidgeot Control. I'm not quite sure what the Lugia's lost to in top 8. However, you know, Lugia can always lose to itself with some of those Lugia hands. So we're going to be moving on here to take a look at some of these lists, specifically starting off with this Gardevoir Banette deck. It's a very interesting deck, very strong, and we're seeing a lot of top players sort of leaning towards this sort of list. So this is the list that won the Late Night 215. You'll notice we've got the full sort of Gardevoir line in here with those Refinement Curlias. We have the Puppet Offering Banette that says that when it just sits on your bench, and then you can Lost Zone it and find a supporter card from your discard pile and put it into your hand. Got the Spiritomb to shut off Rotom, and Lumineons and all other basic Vs. Monkey Dories to spread damage counters around. The thing that I'm surprised not to see in this list actually is that Radiant Alakazam. I would have expected to see Radiant Alakazam in here, but yeah, we see some other players playing that in this deck, but not in this specific one that won the late night. For another flavor of the Gardevoir Banette, this is Azul's list from the late night 216, and there's a few differences in here, and really the major one is Azul is not playing those 3 trekking shoes. Instead, he's got a Kofu in here, just a little bit of a different supporter count. He's got 2 gravity gemstones instead of just 1, then a full 4 luminous energy rather than just 3. So those are a couple of the differences in the list here. The other thing to note is Azul has the heavy ball where the other list did not. So Azul saving some room in the deck by not playing those trekking shoes. And this seems like a very strong deck in this format. Obviously, item lock is always a very strong thing to do, and now when you can manipulate damage counters the way you can with Monkey Dory and add extra damage during your turn, more than just that 30 damage that the Everlasting Darkness is doing from the Banette EX. That just seems really strong. I want to just cover the deck lists of the decks in the top 8, if we go back here, that are a little bit more unusual, a little bit less refined. Obviously, we all kind of know about Lugia and Dragapult a little bit these days, but I want to take a look at the list like Gardevoir Banette that maybe some players haven't had time to really delve into. So we're going to look at Klawf a little bit here. One of the strengths of this deck is between that Pecharunt, the Radiant Sneasler, and the Brute Bonnet, you can actually get turn 1 going first donks with the Perilous Jungle as well. It's difficult to do, but it is possible. And so that is just like a really strong thing. Obviously, the Pecharunt can poison between turns and does additional poison with the Perilous Jungle and the Radiant Sneasler, and it's the Pecharunt's ability. And then the Brute Bonnet poisons both active Pokemon when it has a tool attached to it. And so you can really like just steal games on turn 1 going first if your opponent started like a 70 HP Pokemon. Like they start Fan Rotom, don't bench anything else, and you can steal that game on turn 1 before your opponent has even had a turn. Klawf also hitting weakness against things like Miraidon and Terapagos can matter, although I found that the Terapagos matchup is not as easy for Klawf as you would think, because they can just attack with the Pidgeot EX and use their Dusknoirs to make things difficult for you. Moving on to Pidgeot control. This is a fairly typical Pidgeot control list as far as I can tell. The Sandshrew in here obviously keeps trainer cards in your opponent's discard pile from being shuffled back into their deck by the effect of supporter cards and items, I believe. And then you have also the Genesect. When it has a tool attached to it, your opponent can't play Ace-Specs from their hand. So those are really interesting. And then the Diancie is an attacker into the Lugia matchup to make that a little bit better. Pidgeot control is really in an interesting spot in the meta. I think it's got a tough time against a couple of decks like Lugia, for example. So that can be a tough one. That Diancie does help a little bit, but I still think Lugia is probably pretty favored into this matchup. And then to round out some of those top 8 lists, we do have this Snorlax control list. It's similar to Sanders' 12th place list at Lille, in that it's using the boxed orders and not playing the Rotom V. However, it is very different because it is using that Jubilife Village Stadium, where Sander was not playing that. So that's a really interesting change here. Snorlax control has a few tough matchups in the format. I think specifically one of them, again, is Lugia. Lugia is kind of that thing keeping control a little bit at bay. I also think Terapagos is fine into Snorlax, as long as they play the Jet Energy. A lot of Terapagos lists aren't playing the Jet Energy, however, and so if their only 2 switching effects are Prime Catcher and Switch in the Terapagos deck, then Terapagos is going to have a little bit of a tough time into Snorlax. But as long as they play sort of that third switching out with that Jet Energy, I think it is slightly favored for Terapagos. So these are some of the interesting lists that are doing well online right now, aside from sort of our top contenders, Regidrago, Raging Bolt, Lugia, Charizard, those sorts of things. So hopefully this video gave you some information on what new decks are starting to do well in the online space. Specifically, that Gardevoir Banette deck might be a deck that more people might start gravitating towards, or at least just trying out, that they might not have known about before. And then obviously Pidgeot Control, Snorlax Control are out there, as well as the Klawf. If you want to get a little crazy, play that Klawf deck and have a good time. But if you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you guys in the next video.